G'day everyone. Today we're going to do a video on what the role of the chair is and how best to do your job as the chair of a debate. So, the role of the chair at its most basic and first level is to manage the debate. So this includes facilitating introductions at the start of the debate. It involves keeping order in the debate if speakers are speaking beyond the 17-minute and 15-second grace period, or if they're otherwise breaking the rules. That can include things like making teams be quiet if they're yelling too much during the debate and you can't hear the speaker, or stopping teams from badgering other speakers while they're offering POIs, or telling people to be quiet when they're offering POIs outside of the allowed time. That's all pretty straightforward. What this video is mostly going to focus on, however, is the role of the chair in managing the discussion and managing the deliberation process after the debate, because that is when you come into the most important role you have as a chair and also the most challenging one. So, as the chair in the deliberation, you have, I guess, two main goals. The first is you want to reach the result of the debate, but the second one is you want to manage the discussion that leads to getting that result in a way that allows all judges on your panel to fully participate in that discussion. And that's important for making sure that you do get the right call, because there's always something important that people have to add to that discussion. Importantly, it is not about ensuring that your call as the chair is the result that prevails, but it is ensuring that you come to a consensus as a panel. And if that ultimate consensus reflects what your decision originally was, that's great. If it doesn't, that just means the panelists have contributed something to that discussion to reach a more accurate result. So the opinions of the wings should be respected and should be included in that discussion and should be listened to. It's not something that's simply done to, for the sake of it. It's not something done to make them feel good. It's done for the process of making sure the decision that is ultimately reached is the correct one. However, if at times you cannot reach a clear consensus by the end of the allotted time, that would usually be 15 to 20 minutes depending on the tournament, then you must come to a vote in order to decide the results of that decision. So let's get a bit more in depth now about how you actually manage that discussion. So what do you do with trainees and panelists? What's important about it is that you have to talk to them. So you should ask them questions, you should get specific with those questions and ask them how they viewed certain clashes or what clash was important, or if they're not getting to the piece of rebuttal or argument you think is important, ask them what they thought of that to make sure that they didn't miss it and to make sure that your understanding of that is correct as well. It's also important to make sure you involve everyone. So obviously there are some time constraints, and you don't have time necessarily to, have everyone give a 15-20 minute adjudication during that deliberation, but it is important that everyone speaks. And that includes trainees as well. So it is important that trainees, while they can't vote, still have a voice in that discussion, still able to say what their thoughts are, because it is important for them as a learning experience. Obviously though, with time restrictions, you can't give everyone the time they need. So it's important to set clear and reasonable expectations about how you're going to manage that discussion and ensure you keep order in that discussion. So all I like to do is at the start of the discussions, I'll say things like, all right, panelist A, can you please explain your call in no more than 90 seconds, 2 minutes, whatever it is. So you give them a clear time limit and expectation of what you want, and then if they do start speaking over that, you are able to cut them off politely, obviously, but because you've told them how long they have to speak. And it's important as well that if they're getting a bit off track away from clash, like if you've asked someone to talk about the OOOG split and they start talking about the closing half, it's okay to stop them and say, hey, can we come back to this discussion? Similarly on that, it is important as well to make sure with trainees that they are included. But obviously at times time restrictions can be a bit limited. So if you don't have enough time to fully engage the trainee as if they were a voting panelist, it is important that you acknowledge that, apologize, and have a discussion with them after the oral adjudication is complete so that they still get all the benefits that you need, but you also are balancing that against not running the tournament late by having a 30-minute deliberation. Importantly, the way in which you have that deliberation can also change in a number of ways depending on the results you get. So once you've had your couple of minutes of silent thinking as a panel, you should first note down everybody's calls on a piece of paper so that you know where everyone's sitting. And that's going to lead then to a couple of different scenarios you'll have to engage with as the chair, and we're going to look at those scenarios now and how to deal with them. Scenario one is the dream scenario, and that is that everyone has the same rankings and you all agree on the debate. So what do you do there? You still need to listen to the panelist justification. So you still need to give everyone a chance to explain why they saw the clashes the way they did, because that's important for you getting information on the panelist to give to the ad score and feedback. It's important for the panelists and the trainees to ensure they are able to practice giving their reasoning. And thirdly, it's also important for building your oral adjudication, because you want to make sure that you're including all the thoughts. But additionally, if you've missed something or there's something you might not have given as much emphasis as other people did, it might be important to include that as well in the oral adjudication. The second scenario is one in which everyone agrees except one person. So do you shun the non-believer in this? Absolutely not. They should not be pushed out because they have a different view. You should identify where the differences are in interpretation and then try and ask them questions about that. So usually one person will have a different read on one issue or a piece of framing, or they'll take a different meaning away from an extension. And it's important to try and identify what makes that reasoning different from the rest of the panel. So normally it's good to ask that person to explain what their difference was on that particular split, or why they ranked that team in a certain way first, and then have one of the other panelists or yourself respond and try and adjudicate why that difference is, and then how we ultimately resolve that difference. The third scenario then is there are some agreements in the ranks, but there are also some differences. So it's important to consolidate and try and find where a consensus can be reached across all of those. So you want to move on to breaking those specific disagreements. So if it's, and often you'll see that as two teams are ranked the other way around. So it's important to start with that one. If you have a problem where like an opening and a closing team are ranked differently, it might be useful to get the panelist who has the opening team ranked first to identify what they think the opening's contribution is, and then have the closing panelist identify how they think the closing team extends beyond that and why that outweighs what the opening is, and then give the right of response to the same person or someone else who believes that opening has taken it over closing, in order to ensure you're trying to really flesh out and get a clear idea amongst everybody what is the difference between those teams and where do we think the disagreement about the ranks are, and then you can discuss which one should actually come ahead of the other one. The fourth scenario, the terrible, dreaded scenario, is where there are no common points at all and everybody disagrees. What do you do? Step one is probably panic. But you should try not to panic, and you should try and fight that impulse as much as possible and remain calm. Because at the end of the day, you're just going to have to enter a longer discussion now, and that is it. So you should have a discussion around pairwise comparisons between the teams. And what we mean by that is just saying, all right, let's just start then. We've got a really big disagreement here over whether OG beats OO. Let's start there and see which team has beaten the other one. Try and resolve that clash, and then see where the rankings sit after that, and if that has changed anyone else's perspective on that. And you kind of just keep doing that from one to the other for terms of the splits until you reach an order that everyone is happy with, or you run out of time and have to vote. What I like to do normally here is, if it's a complete mess and there is no clear way to start, it can be useful to start with the opening half, settle that, then you can do the government bench, then you do the closing half, and then you've just got the closing half left. And by that time, you're kind of, each discussion builds upon the previous discussion because you have readily gone through the material already. That doesn't work in every scenario. If there is more disagreement around closing half teams, it kind of depends, what the results and what the difference is that you've gotten. It is important though with this sort of scenario that you have to be considerate of the timing. So you don't want to spend the first 12 minutes of deliberation sorting out just one pairwise deliberation, because then you've still got many more to go. So you do need to try and keep your own sense of time and try and limit each discussion to an appropriate amount of time. And sometimes you'll see that some disagreements will be bigger than others, or you might think that if we resolve this discussion, it will resolve this other discussion. So if you have a question about how good the extension of CG is, resolving that compared to OG might also provide a lot of information to help you resolve the closing half clash if you're weighing up who have the better substantive extension. So it can be useful to try and think about, maybe I need to prioritize that first one, because that will take up a lot of time, but it will also mean it helps you with the second clash as well. So once you've settled out and sorted one of those rankings, you then need to basically just rinse and repeat. So you do the same thing again with each clash. The next thing after all those scenarios, you finally got your rankings, congratulations, happy days. You now need to assign speaker scores to each of those speeches. So it's important here that this is also a consensus process, and it is not just one in which you as the chair can just put in the speaker scores you like and move on. So what would be useful to do here is to start normally with the team that came first, identify which speaker that everyone generally thought was the better or worse speaker in that pairing, or if they were roughly the same. And it is important to also say, you know, was one higher or lower than the other, or were they the same? Because you don't want people to artificially think they have to give a higher speaker score to one over the other if indeed they had the same speaker score. And this is also a consensus here, so it's important that you're asking people what they all think. You can refer to the speaker scale as a way to identify what those scores are. And if everyone's a bit lost, or if everyone's got a really broad range of speaker scores, it's your job as the chair to try and guide the panel to the range they should be looking at, and then decide to speak. That is not to sort of tell everyone what to do and overrule their thoughts, but refer them to the guide. Try and see where the criteria they're most likely to fit under, and figure out the scores within that. And then once you've done all that, please submit the ballot. You must put the ballot in immediately then, so that we can make sure the tab rolls on time. Obviously, after you've done the speaker scores, you then do the oral adjudication. We're not going to go into the oral adjudication in this video, so we do recommend you watch our video on how to structure an OA instead. The last important thing you need to think about as a chair that kind of gets overlooked sometimes is it's also your role as a chair to provide feedback to the adjudication core on the panelists and trainees in your room. So when doing this, it is firstly important to make sure you refer to the panelist feedback scale that is inside the WUDC judge manual, or whatever guide the tournament has provided to you, because you want to have people scoring across a consistent scale rather than sort of giving one person giving a 10 and thinking they're kind of rubbish, and one person giving a 10 and thinking they are God's gift to adjudicating. So please make sure you refer to the scale for consistency. So what are we actually looking for as an adjudication core in those comment boxes when you're asked to describe or give feedback on that panelist or the trainee? While having the correct call straight away can be a good thing, it is not always necessarily the most important thing or the most useful thing, because they could have the correct call but have entirely fluked their way into it, or it could have been an entirely straightforward debate to judge. What we're looking for is how they contribute to the discussion and how their logic and explanation is. Because we're not in that discussion room, we can't know what they're saying, but you as the chair do. So what are we looking for? Are they asking correct questions in that deliberation? Are they providing useful insights to the debate? Are they picking up things that were said at an extension that weren't noted? Are they picking up additional mechanisms or implicit responses? Are they weighing things properly? Or on the flip side, are they doing bad things? Are they entering the debate? Are they ignoring material for no apparent reason? Have they just missed large chunks of the debate? Information like that explains how useful they are on a panel and how well they understand and view the debate is what we as the adjudication core want to understand. Ideally, we don't want a 7 or 8 page essay that fully explains the adjudicator's call and the call of the debate, because we're not going to have time to read 8 pages when we have hundreds of panelists' feedback we have to read. So we don't want a retelling of the debate. Just explain to us how that panelist has participated in the discussion and whether they provided useful insights. And that wraps up the video. Hopefully that's given you some more insight and some more help into how to act as a chair in a British parliamentary debate. If you have any more questions, please feel free to drop them in the comments below or check out the WUDC manual. We're always happy to provide information where we can. And best of luck with judging, not just at Worlds, but at any comps you might be judging at.